All right, rolling things along, all recruiting show-ish, some position group battle coming later today. But want to go outside of the offensive line room, Brian. A trio of guys to mention here that Oregon's after in the class of 2026. I'll start with Brock Harris, blue chip tight end prospect, who is in my neck of the woods, actually, in southern Utah. He's down in St. George, where I was literally golfing earlier today before we hopped on here to record this show. I played great. Thank you for asking. And I know that Lanning is making him a priority. He's been out to see him, I believe, at least twice. And this is someone who he's been recruiting for the last couple of cycles. What's the latest that you've heard on a guy that more than a couple of programs have been aware of for the last couple of years?
He has really narrowed it down pretty quick. He's got visits lined up to Georgia for May 16th, Oregon June 6th, Michigan June 13th, BYU June 20th. Miami, Utah, LSU, and a few others may get visits. But if I had to just reading the tea leaves, BYU, Oregon, that wouldn't be a shocker for a kid from the state of Oregon, would be the ones I'd watch. Georgia's the wild card because they are so good at tight end. Their tight end coach does a tremendous job. Those would be the ones I would watch. It's kind of coming to a head pretty quick. I saw him last year at Under Armour. Nobody knew who he was because this kid from Utah going to Orlando Under, like, who the hell is this kid from Utah? It was random, and he was really good. So everybody started interviewing him. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, he's generated a lot of buzz in my neck of the woods and local media, and he's kind of become must-see high school football on Friday nights in the fall because he's an incredibly talented guy. And I've noticed in the last couple of years, Brian, in all 3 years, I believe, that Dan Lanning has been Oregon's head coach, there's been a true freshman contributor at tight end, or at least young guys seem like they're always ready to go at the tight end spot more than others. Is there a reason for that in your view?
Tight end, if you're going to run multiple tight end sets, run 12 personnel, it's just a numbers game. Maybe when he came in, were they behind at tight end? That could be the only other reason. Because barring a bunch of injuries, you don't want to play them there because of blocking. It's about power. I mean, I know they recruit well, but that's hard for a freshman tight end to play a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there was some of that. My mind might be jumping back to 2021 a little bit, but in 2023, you had Kenyon Sadiq play a hefty amount of meaningful snaps. Roger Saliapaga stepped up this year when Terrence Ferguson was out injured. And it's because, to your point, Oregon runs a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. They go jumbo, no receivers, extra offensive linemen, 3 tight ends, and you got to have guys, which is why I think this is a position where Oregon kind of makes a soft priority, I'd say, every year. It's not a position group where they typically go out and, hey, let's get 3 or 4 tight ends, like you would see with receiver or offensive lineman, defensive lineman, linebacker, corner, DB, like wherever you see multiple. Feels like the number is usually 1 to 2 in a particular recruiting class.
Yeah, I just think they're like anybody else. They want to do what they want to do. They want to play power football. He's trying to be Alabama of the West a little bit, and that's something Saban did. So if you're good enough, he'll play you. Saban played a lot of freshmen too. I think that's kind of where he got it. Then, of course, he moved on with Kirby at Georgia, kind of continued that theme. I think they'll do it in the future, and I'm sure they're selling Brock on that too. Don't kid yourself. I highly doubt they have a pass catcher quite like Brock on the roster. He's got incredible hands. Not saying they don't have somebody as athletic or more athletic. I don't know, but his hands are ridiculous. Just to kind of make fun of you because you didn't know who he was on the Big Ten show, he reminds me of Brent Jones. Yeah, you didn't look that up.
Jones, just to be clear, I'm fully aware of who Brock Harris is and have been for the last couple of years. But yeah, Ryan Herrings of Locked On Badgers on the squad, which will drop later today, used a few tight end names from the past that dated me as a younger individual in.
Brent Jones was a famous player for the Niners when Montana was there.
See, I'm a Seahawks guy.
I'm not. That's fine. I'm not a Niners guy, but he was just that good.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I've got some tight end history to study up on, to be sure. But another guy who Oregon has reached into the final 6, 8, kind of in that range, which is where kids are at right now. I mean, everyone's different, but it feels like the average is kind of top 6 to 8-ish teams. But Carrie Adams is another blue chip guy Oregon's going after. What can you tell Oregon fans about Adams?
Adams is one of my favorite players in the class, regardless of position, just like how he's been coached. He plays at Loyola Academy, Baltimore area, elite length. He's off a computer screen for what you want at corner because even if he screws up, his length and his athleticism can help you recover. And his offer list kind of exemplifies that. Penn State, Notre Dame, Auburn, Oregon, and I forget the other one, but it's just like, okay, well, this is obvious. And he's a kid that I think could play right away at anywhere. Oregon, Georgia, whatever. He's a national top 50 kid. And he's a little more polished than a lot of DB. Sometimes, like I lived in Florida for a long time. There are about 50 corners in the state athletically are really, really good, but most of them are raw. This kid is not as raw. He's not perfect, but for a high school kid going to his senior year, he's further along. And that's why everybody's so high on him. I would expect everybody to continue to pursue him very, very heavily. Oh, South Carolina's the other one.
What kind of South Carolina underrated recruiting power? Some of you who are everydayers for the last couple of years, I appreciate you all very much, but you might remember the name Nicholas Harbor, who Oregon was after, and it was down to the Ducks and South Carolina, and he of course chose the Gamecocks, and he has been every bit the physical freak that he was coming out of high school, and that has translated. And going into next year with Lenore Sellers at quarterback, I mean, I feel like they have to have a Wildcat package with those two guys and just put them in the backfield and say, I dare you to try and stop them on 3rd and 2 if we just call a straight read option here. Because, I mean, they are every bit as athletic as you think they are. And Dylan Stewart is another example of a guy that I think on paper you would just look at and say, yeah, I mean, he's going to go to one of the power programs, Bama or Georgia or LSU or whoever. And then you look up and what do you know? He's in South Carolina. And anytime the Gamecocks are in play, that's what my mind always goes to, is they are not to be discounted. Shane Beamer is a pretty darn good ball coach. But last guy we'll talk about here, and then we'll talk about some 2025 kids to wrap up today's show and what their timelines might be for playing for the Ducks. But Elbert Hill, according to a couple different, depends on which service you look at, but a couple places I've seen Brian have him listed as higher rated than Adams and have Hill as the number 1 overall corner in the class of 2026. Let's start there. Is that something that you think is an accurate assessment?
I don't think the number 1 corner is going to be 5'10" and a half. That's just my opinion, but he can play. He's physical and he's fast as all get out. He plays at Archbishop Hoban's. Program's been around forever. Northern Ohio, and his offer list kind of exemplifies that. I think he's visited Ohio State like 11 times over the last 3 years. Kid that everybody knew about early. Could probably play running back. Could probably play receiver. He's a really good athlete. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, not shocking or highly involved. Oregon, the typical fly in the ointment, who did well in the state of Ohio last year, so who knows?
Very well. Very well in the state of Ohio last year.
So maybe there's a chance there, but I don't know how I don't know if you saw who Ohio State just hires their DC. I don't know how that's going to work, but that's a whole nother story.
I did see that. Yeah. For those who don't know, Ohio State hired former Patriots defensive coordinator and one-time Lions head coach Matt Patricia to replace Jim Knowles. And I mean, as a head coach, he stunk, but as a DC, I think he was pretty darn good.
Can he recruit though? Like his personality, how's that going to translate, and will he want to do it? No idea. That's my only question. I know he knows X's and O's, but that doesn't mean you can relate to college kids. It's a different animal. So that's one of the more interesting things to talk about in many regards with the recruiting moving forward. But it's not very hard to sell Ohio State to a kid from the greater Cleveland, Akron area. So I'll pick the Buckeyes every time on that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But 90% of the time they get those guys. But Hill can fly, and he's a physical player. So Oregon got him. It could be, I think, like his best spot might be nickel long term. That's a possibility too. He's just a good football player. I think he's a playmaker. I don't know, positionally, there's only one spot you should list him at. He's just a really good football player.
Yeah, and speaking of Ohio State, by the way, Brian Hartline was named Ohio State's offensive coordinator because they didn't want him to go elsewhere. I mean, he probably deserved that. The guy is one of the 3 or 4 best recruiters in all of college football. I mean, this year, the best non-coordinator recruiter, according to 24/7 Sports, is Oregon's own Chris Hampton as the secondary coach because of the haul that he brought in. So it's not as if they it's not as if there aren't other great recruiters in the country, of course, but I mean, Heartline, you could make the case, Brian, like that track record is rather impeccable. So I understand where the Buckeyes are coming from there. And Oregon just lost a great recruiter as a wide receiver coach in Junior Adams.
I talked about that on my show today.
Yeah, to the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm more than a little interested to see who they hire and what that does to the recruiting future of that position room, which has been better than it ever has before. But
back coach to receiver coach. That's my prediction.
You think they promote Rashad Samples? That was an option that I discussed earlier this week.
He's coached receivers before. He's an excellent recruiter, and he has ties to Texas where there's receivers abound. Yes, that's my pick.